And if there are gaps, we need to acknowledge that. So the objective of today is alignment, everyone on the same page, of the Scrum framework in its theory and in the current implementation efforts, in understanding what does it do, what does it not do. And I want everyone in the room to understand. Then I want us to jump into Agile, which is the methodology that this is based off of. We'll talk about the key people within Scrum. We'll discuss operationally what Leap has gaps in, because there are a few. And we'll review anything that might be missing in terms of the ceremonies, and we'll schedule that in. You'll understand the context of this as we jump through it. So if you don't know words in here, that's okay, you will by the end. But again, today is alignment, everyone on the same page. So before we jump into Scrum, we actually need to talk about Agile, because Scrum is just one framework of the Agile umbrella. So in this, you might have heard already in terms of Lean programming, Kanban. Those are the ones that I've used before at least. And Scrum falls under that. All these things try to achieve the same thing in Scrum, which is to do things in smaller increments so that you can get live responses from it. Glenn, can you share with everyone real quick?
Về cái Scrum với Agile, có lẽ mọi người nghe cái thuật ngữ này rất là nhiều rồi, nhưng mà thực tế thì Agile nó là một cái thuật ngữ tổng thể, nó là một cái methodology, nhưng đồng thời nó cũng là một cái mindset. Còn cái Scrum hay là những cái mọi người thường nghe ví dụ như là Lean hay là Kanban hoặc là những cái tương tự như vậy á, nó là những cái framework mà nó ứng dụng cái methodology là Agile hoặc là nó ứng dụng cái mindset Agile để mà tạo ra. Thì mỗi cái framework ví dụ như là Scrum hay Kanban hay Lean thì nó sẽ có một cái cách thức sử dụng khác nhau và phù hợp với một vài cái môi trường khác nhau. Thì ở đây đối với Leap thì mình đang nói về là cái khung Scrum trước.
Great, thank you. In essence, similar to Lean and Design UX, Agile is a mindset. They are trying to, in the past there was something called waterfall, and we'll share an image of that later, but ultimately it didn't work very effectively because you never had the opportunity to review your work and fix it if there was something wrong. You had to go 100% as you planned. And so with Agile, the whole point was, can development be more collaborative? Can development also be more self-organizing, meaning that they can take ownership of their work and try to solve the problems on their own without anyone telling them what to do? So ultimately with Agile, it's like Ryan was mentioning, it's an umbrella term that includes a bunch of frameworks. I'll share with you the manifesto that's linked here and the 12 principles in the following page. But essentially, a few decades back, there were a group of men who met together. They were all developers or technology people, and they wanted to understand more about how they could improve development. At the time, waterfall was most popular, which means you would do all your design at once, all your requirements at once, all your design second, your development third, your deployment fourth. And you never repeat. You just literally go 1, 2, 3, 4, and the cycle ends. And what they saw was that it took so much effort to plan, and when they executed on this very big app, it turned out that people didn't really want half the features. And so the developers tried to think of an easier way to deploy different things and get insights sooner. So that's how Agile came to be. Hoyan, can you share more?
Yeah. Cái bên Agile mình gặp khá là nhiều rồi, thì Agile nó có nghĩa là linh hoạt, nhận ra cái việc thì có nghĩa là linh hoạt. Thì cái này nó sẽ khác với cái waterfall mà mình đã gặp trước đây. Tức là cái waterfall là mình nhận cái yêu cầu từ một người nào đó, xong rồi cái dòng thông tin nó cứ theo một chiều nó đi xuống như vậy. Thì đối với cái này thì mình sẽ có rất ít cơ hội mình sửa chữa hay gì đó. Thứ hai là cái collaboration nó sẽ không có tốt, tại vì kiểu việc ai người đó làm theo kiểu một cái dòng chảy như vậy. Và cái sự chủ động cũng không có luôn, tại vì mình phải chờ đợi cái requirement từ một người nào đó, xong rồi mình cứ chờ bước này qua thì mới tới bước này. Trong khi cái Agile nó linh hoạt hơn ở chỗ là mình có tập trung vào hai thứ. Thứ nhất là collaboration, có nghĩa là tất cả những cái stakeholder, những cái members nào mà tham gia vào cái dự án này sẽ phải gặp nhau thường xuyên hơn, trao đổi với nhau thường xuyên hơn. Cái thứ hai là tính tự chủ động, cái self organization cái tự chủ động này có nghĩa là một người đều hiểu là mình cần làm gì, mình chủ động trong công việc của mình chủ động trao đổi thông tin với người khác. và chủ động đưa ra cái giải pháp, chứ không cần là phải chờ một người nào đó đưa ra requirement và một người nào đó đưa ra solution. Thì hai cái tập trung lớn nhất của Agile là như vậy.
Okay, so I'll jump into the actual manifesto itself, and it's quite simple. I'll share it briefly in English first, so English readers, please take a look before we jump to Vietnamese. This group of developers, their goal was to uncover better ways of developing software and to help others. They really wanted a product that helped others. And so they had 4 specific values that they proposed. First, it was individuals and interactions over process and tools. So you may have 1,000 SOPs, but it might actually be easier if you get out of your chair, go to your colleague, and ask them questions. Second, they wanted working software over comprehensive documentation. So what this literally meant in the tech world was that you wanted to deploy an MVP as soon as possible. This is something we know already, right? But back in the day, they didn't. You came out with the final good before you did any MVP, before you could really test with anyone. Third, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, meaning you actually work with your user in order to find a solution. And lastly, responding to change over following a plan. Now this one I want to clarify that there are plans, you have roadmaps, you need to execute on things. But responding to change means that if you get really good feedback or insights from an implementation, you take that in and figure out how to fix your app. You don't just not have that there, right? So this was the kind of value that they wanted to offer. Juan, can you share in Vietnamese?
Với cái phần mềm với cái tuyên ngôn Agile này á, thì người ta phát hiện ra là mình có 4 cái mục nó quan trọng hơn. Tại vì trước đây là mình rất quan trọng về mình phải có một cái quy trình rõ ràng cụ thể, mình phải có những cái công cụ nào đó để mình support cho mình, rồi mình phải document tất cả mọi thứ thành những cái tài liệu mà thiệt là detail, thiệt là rõ ràng á. Thì khi mà người ta phát hiện ra cái khung Agile này á, thì người ta đi cao hơn là cái sự cá nhân. Ở đây có nghĩa là từng người, giống như là cái sự tự chủ động của mình lúc nãy á, cá nhân người ta hiểu được về cái project và cá nhân tự chủ động được cái sự tương tác giữa mọi người. Thì cá nhân và sự tương tác này nó quan trọng hơn là cái việc mình có một cái quy trình rõ ràng và những cái công cụ nó fancy hay gì đó. Cái phần mềm chạy tốt thì nó quan trọng hơn tài liệu đầy đủ. Thì ở đây giống như cách mình hay nói về MVP hay là những cái mà mình cải tiến liên tục á, cái sự cải tiến liên tục đó để làm cho phần mềm chạy tốt hơn, nó quan trọng hơn là việc mình spend rất nhiều thời gian để mình làm ra những cái tài liệu đầy đủ. Cái thứ ba là công tác với khách hàng, quan trọng hơn là phản đồng. Thì công tác với khách hàng tức là mình tiếp nhận cái user feedback á, thì cái này mình nói rất là nhiều rồi, mình hiểu được cái tầm quan trọng của cái feedback của user nó quan trọng như thế nào. Cho dù mình có những cái hợp đồng rất là tốt nhưng mà mình không có tiếp nhận feedback của khách hàng và mình không có dùng nó để mà tạo ra những sản phẩm tốt hơn thì nó cũng không đạt được cái mục đích của mình. Cái thứ tư là phản hồi và thay đổi là quan trọng hơn bám sát kế hoạch. Thì đối với cái môi trường á, có một số môi trường thì nó rất là quan trọng cái việc là có một kế hoạch chuẩn ngay từ đầu, nhưng mà đối với việc phát triển phần mềm á, thì mình cảm thấy là mình cái môi trường của mình á, nó thay đổi rất là nhanh, mình không thể nào mà mình biết được tất cả những thay đổi của môi trường. Thì cách mà mình adapt, cách mà mình tiếp cận nó và thích nghi với nó quan trọng hơn là cái việc là mình cứ bám sát một kế hoạch cho từ ban đầu.
So alongside the manifesto were 12 specific principles so that you can figure out how to execute on it. And I'll only call out a few in English, the ones that I think will be relevant. But number 1, our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. This is something that Leap already does, right? But the dynamic has changed because we're trying to figure out how to be more efficient through our process and essentially effective when we deploy. And we talk about testing. So this is an opportunity where we can satisfy the customer and make sure that we have the delivery of the product that they're looking for. Number 10, simplicity. The art of maximizing the amount of work not done is essential. You're simplifying your workflow, but you're also simplifying the product because the simpler things are to get done, the easier it will be. And so if we think about Leap's process right now, and if we did not see the workflow on Monday, who knew exactly how you could get a new feature on the lap of the development team, right? that one was a bit tough because there were so many different pain points of like, well, do I go through Nguyen? Do I go through Duc? Do I go to Randy? Like, how do I actually implement some of these things? And then how do people design it? It's a sign that it could be simpler, right? But I actually want to share it in Vietnamese because I think it will be much more effective. Another thing I want to call out is number 6. It's all about face-to-face conversations. Sometimes we get stuck in email or Slack. Sometimes we want to send surveys over the internet, but ultimately face-to-face conversations will be much faster, generally speaking, so that you don't have any miscommunication and waste time coming back and forth. But please take some time to read this. Everyone has a slide, and hopefully everyone can read this. This is the mindset that they're talking about. It's not just, follow Scrum, have this ceremony, have planning on Monday. That's not what Agile is about. It's a mindset. And these are the pieces of that mindset. If you please learn.
I'm getting a low energy from the room right now, and this is really critical. And I don't want to jump into the time. I'm going to tell me, Jenny, what do you think? I actually would really like to go around the table, have everybody just go through a point and just take a moment to just say it out loud and chat and see how it resonates with you and your work right now.
Yes, please.
Can we do that?
Excellent.
And Duc, can we start with number 1?
Why don't we do it standing up so we can get some blood flowing?
Can do that too.
Everybody stand up for a second.
Là bắt đầu với số 1 đi.
Yell at the TV, go. No.
Yeah. I will read it in English.
Okay.
Let's read out each one.
Ưu tiên cao nhất của chúng tôi là thỏa mãn khách hàng thông qua việc chuyển giao sớm và liên tục các phần mềm và giá trị.
Ý nghĩa này là như thế nào?
Anh hiểu như thế nào thì anh nói ra cho mọi người, xong mọi người sẽ hình dung về ý kiến của mình.
Tức là cái này nó sẽ là cái ưu tiên đầu tiên của cái Agile là đảm bảo được cái sự satisfy, là cái sự thỏa mãn của khách hàng và đảm bảo được là cái tính liên tục của cái sản phẩm.
Do you think what? Oh, go ahead, Jenny.
I was going to ask a question. When you guys are doing your work and you come into the office every day, is it the customer, like the customers and the PT and the feature clubs that you're thinking about when you're making your code, just out of curiosity, or when you're doing your digital marketing or anything?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. For the marketing, that's for sure. Có không biết đúng cách không?
How about other aspects? Do you guys think about marketing, or do you think about backlog, or I have to get this deployed right away, or Randy needs to hear from me, right?
Yes. So probably the most important thing we always think about the clients, but it's from our point we also think that, but it's correct or not, we're not sure. We only put the certified.
I think
customer need is the most important.
We haven't tested
That's
yet,
great.
Yes.
right?
Yes.
That's agile in that mindset. So I think that's awesome that everyone is aligned on that. Let's move on to the second point.
Chào đón việc thay đổi yêu cầu, thậm chí rất muộn trong quá trình phát triển, các quy trình linh hoạt tận dụng sự thay đổi cho các lợi thế cạnh tranh của khách hàng. Em nghĩ là cái này nó có nghĩa là những thay đổi có thể diễn ra bất kỳ lúc nào, nhưng nó phải dựa trên cái đầu tiên, đấy là thỏa mãn khách hàng và nó tạo ra được những cái cạnh tranh và cái value với khách hàng rất nhiều, thì nó có thể thay đổi bất kỳ lúc nào dù là rất muộn đi chăng nữa. Có nghĩa là rất muộn có thể nói là thực ra cái này không cần thiết, có thể chúng ta stop cái đấy lại và start là một thứ mà chúng ta nghĩ rằng là nó cần thiết hơn rất nhiều vào thời điểm đấy. Thì đấy là explain.
Một ví dụ là online coaching, tức là mình thấy cái đợt dịch này, cái chuyện face to face meeting nó khó, thì mình có thể chuyển qua làm cái đó nhanh.
Giao dịch là một thứ hơi bất biến.
Well, from our Tillerman perspective, we see that the stress for you guys is changing requirements. Right now, when requirements change, you guys get so stressed out. So this is something we have to think about. Like, if we follow this, it's like, what do we have to change about our workflow, about our perspective, so that we welcome the challenge and we see all the reason is for what? To serve the customer. Right? How do we make it less stressful?
And I think it's also about reducing any redundancy, inefficiencies from top down, right? Because one thing that we also recognize internally is sometimes the requirements aren't clear. That's why it has to go back and get redone, not that the customer does or does not like it. So I want to differentiate that, like Dan was saying, it's dependent on number one. It's a new requirement that's driven by the customer feedback. And if that's the case, strive for it. But if it's a requirement change and feedback that's internal, then question it and see how you can remove the repetition.
Thường xuyên chuyển giao phần mềm chạy tốt tới khách hàng từ vài tuần đến vài tháng, ưu tiên cho các khoảng thời gian ngắn hơn. Về cái nguyên tắc thứ ba này thì Lộc nghĩ là nó thể hiện được cái tính linh hoạt và nhanh chóng của Agile. Nó giúp cho cái team phát triển web có thể có một cái sự kết nối liên tục với khách hàng bằng cái việc là cập nhật, việc sửa chữa những cái lỗi hoặc là những cái yếu tố chưa có tốt trên app, nhưng cũng có thể là cập nhật những cái những chức năng mới trên cái ứng dụng, trên cái phần mềm mà mình đang đưa cho khách hàng sử dụng. Thì và ở đây nó ưu tiên là mình nên thường xuyên làm cái chuyện đó. Trong khoảng thời gian ngắn là có thể cứ vài tuần mình sẽ có một cái update, hoặc là mình publish một cái news thông báo với khách hàng là chúng tôi sẽ update cái ABC này nọ, để họ tạo ra cái sự excited và tạo ra sự connection giữa người làm web và người làm app và khách hàng.
How does this apply to departments that aren't directly producing the software? You're just supporting it. How do you apply this principle to marketing? How do you apply it to product or business team? Or is it just like everybody contributing to the big goal? How does it?
Well, I think you can define product as something different, right? So if I was finance and I was in charge of a certain report or a certain strategy, how could I create increments of change instead of waiting one whole year to release this new financial SOP to everyone, right? So it's about the iteration of things, breaking it down to smaller pieces and executing it in a small way, which you can do it if it's an HR procedure, if it's an event that you're planning, right? Can we have more events? Can we plan it a little bit more lean? Can we launch an in-person thing, such as the academy, right? If you think of the academy operationally, what is the bare bones of this academy that I can implement that will have legs, that people will be interested in, but not the bells and whistles, not with every single feature, because we don't need that thing. So that's how I would approach it operationally. You still can have an MVP of process.
Mọi người có hiểu ý Jenny mà tôi hỏi?
Người có hiểu không? Có ai không hiểu không?
Em
Dịch lại đi, em dịch lại.
Output.
Cái ý đại khái của ý thứ ba này á, thì mọi người có thể nó liên quan tới hai thứ mà mình nghe rất là nhiều. Thứ nhất là cái cải tiến liên tục. Cái sự cải tiến liên tục là cái mình nói mình liên tục check với khách hàng để mình biết được và mình có những cái phần tăng giá trị đó. Còn cái thứ hai nữa là mình sử dụng cái MVP, tức là cái sản phẩm khả dụng tối thiểu. Thì khi mà mình nói sản phẩm khả dụng tối thiểu á, có nghĩa là mình đã đem được cái giá trị cho khách hàng rồi, cái giá trị cốt lõi mà mình muốn đem cho khách hàng thì mình đã đem lại cho khách hàng được rồi và khách hàng ok với cái đó. Còn tất cả những cái phần tăng giá trị sau này của mình á, sẽ là những phần add-in, sẽ là phần mà mình adapt với cái thay đổi của môi trường nữa. Thì đó là những cái phần tăng giá trị này. Thì em nghĩ ý thứ ba này á, nó liên quan tới hai phần này. Mọi người thay đổi hai phần kia thì nó sẽ dễ hiểu.
Nhưng mà cái chỗ này hiểu là cái nguyên tắc thứ ba, nghĩa là mình phải define được một cái gọi là short term, là trong khoảng thời gian ngắn đó mình phải ra được cái gì cho tới khách hàng, và mình lấy feedback, có nghĩa là cái nó sẽ rotate, nó sẽ luân phiên nó một cái cycle nó rất là ngắn, có nghĩa là ví dụ như 2 tuần mình phải ra được cái gì tới user, mình feedback rồi mình implement 2 tuần hoặc là 3 tuần nữa, nghĩa là mỗi lần mình phải có một cái gọi là một cái target ngắn và mình phải release ra được tới end user.
Dạ đúng rồi, về cái phần đi kèm với cái phần mà mình có một cái target, những cái goal ngắn hạn như vậy á, thì mình phải có những cái goal dài hạn hơn. Và khi mà mình nhận cái user feedback đó, có nghĩa là mình tiếp nhận cái feedback của người ta, nhưng không có nghĩa là bất cứ 2 tuần nào mình tiếp nhận feedback của người ta xong mình cũng phải sửa một cái gì đó, nó không thể. Tại vì mình có những cái việc nó quan trọng hơn rất là nhiều, và trong cái backlog của mình á, cả product backlog và kể cả sprint backlog mình đã phân chia nó rõ ràng rồi. Thì những cái feedback của user này á, mình đẩy vào product backlog, nhưng mà không phải là cái nào mình cũng sẽ execute ngay lập tức, mà mình sẽ phải phân chia nó lại.
Lại mà anh nghĩ là không phải lúc nào cũng follow the user vậy, mà đôi lúc mình cũng phải write user theo hướng đó.
Dạ, vâng, cái feedback của user nó là một cái mảng thôi nha, nó không phải là user nói gì mình làm đó, không thể như vậy được, tại vì user người ta không có một cái overview như mình. Dạ.
Actually, I really like what you said. I think about MVP process, right? Because actually, we do that all the time, and it's a really good comparison, right? So many times when we come up with a business idea, we know it's not perfect. We don't try to get it perfect. We try to get it good enough, and then as you're rolling it out, you're iterating and learning and getting better and better. We've been doing that with the academy. If you look at the first certification that we went out, right? It was very much followed the Scrum process where we did the research, we looked at the need, we tested it with a core group, we rolled it out, we took it back, improved it, went out again, improved it. Yeah, it's a really good example.
Yeah, it's really good that every time you heard something new and you relate it back to
Right.
what you did.
What our real world is all the time.
Yes. Yeah, that's really good.
And if we think of it in terms of our operations again, it's an indicator that you will have a good process, but change will always happen. So you may come up with a really great idea, but then in a few weeks, a few months, you'll have a new insight and it'll change. So it's good to not be stuck in our ways and try to continually improve and accept when a better change is happening. I find that sometimes, not in tech really, but much more traditional Vietnamese offices, if you tell them that we need to change operations, they're not very excited about that. I don't think that's going to be the culture here, but I did want to call that out because maybe people outside of tech will feel that way. Like, why do you keep changing things up? This is frustrating. So if you think about onboarding at a tech company, you have to make sure that Leap's culture is saying we are continuously improving. It's not just development team and people related to the app, it's our entire organization. Otherwise, you can have a little bit of mismatch sometimes. I've definitely been in offices where the accounting and HR teams are in a completely different world and they do not want to work with the rest of the team. So I'd be very careful of that when you integrate these ideas outside of this room. Okay, let's move to number 4 for the sake of time. It sounds like 3 is very exciting for us though.
Nhà kinh doanh và nhà phát triển.
Em hiểu sao em nói đấy, hỏi đọc, em hiểu sao.
Is
You need a beer? To finish the sentence, maybe.
Business side,
Yeah.
developer.
Yes, business side developer have to work together, whole time delivery of product. Make sure the development team can deliver the good thing, and it fits with what the customer want. I understand. Yes.
Forgot the một cái từ quan trọng. Daily, hàng ngày.
Yeah, daily.
Daily and collaboration. Em nghĩ cái từ này cũng hơi đơn giản nhưng mua qua
When it's bigger font.
Thứ năm ha.
Dạ.
Thứ năm là bởi vì mình nói là đến cái agile của mình là cái sự linh hoạt là build trên cái relationship giữa người với người. Cho nên theo chỉ hiểu cái này á là để mà làm việc linh hoạt được với nhau thì mình cũng phải tìm thứ nhất là những người có cái motivation và mình cũng phải cho họ cái môi trường, mình cho họ guidance, mình cho họ support để họ có thể họ tự động họ có thể họ work một cách linh hoạt trong cái dự án để làm dự án tốt hơn. Theo chị hiểu là vậy đó, bởi vì là
I have a specific operational development team related example for that, number 5. So the reason why they had that in there is if you think of the product person and the dev person, a product person tells you what the business requirement is, what needs to get done. But the development, so they tell you the what needs to get done. Then the development team is the one that decides how will it get done. And with the UX, it's also how will it look. And so you can't have one person who can control every single aspect of this is what you're doing, this is how you're doing it, this is the timeline, da. That's micromanagement, and in Agile, that doesn't work. And if you want self-organization, you need that motivation, you need to give your people the opportunity to test and play and own that feature that they're developing. Any other comments on 5 before moving to 6?
Yeah, I think 5 relates to the cell organization that we focus. The 2 focus in the when we talk about agile, we talk about collaboration and cell organization, and this is about cell organization.
Exactly. Okay, let's move to 6.
The most efficient and effective method of conveying information to and within a development team is face-to-face conversations. Don't email the guy next to you.
But even then, like, I know that Nuke is sometimes the middleman of communicating the requirements from Randy and then bringing that to the team. This might mean that during the interim, before there is someone who can kind of own that relationship officially, maybe more people can ask questions to Randy to be like, well, what does Randy mean by this requirement? Or what does this feature mean? And make it more collaborative, question-oriented in this specific regard.
Totally not allowed. That's totally against our culture.
But the other thing is, if
lots of questioning.
If you find yourself doing a lot of rework or adjustment, and there's a middle layer communicating, at some point a good practice is just to do like a reality check. Right? Every now and then. Just
hỏi thẳng trực tiếp cho nó nhanh việc. Muốn linh hoạt thì phải chắc chắn cái sổ thông tin nó làm sao để mình có thể bước vào hết.
Cả này mọi người có thể combine nó với một thứ mình hay gọi là validation. Tức là khi mà mình truyền tải những thông tin miệng như vậy thì nó nhanh hơn rất là nhiều, nhưng mình sẽ không có một cái proof cho sau này, cái bằng chứng cho sau này. Thì mình chỉ cần trao đổi miệng, sau đó mình document nó ra sau và mình validate, mình ghét cái người đó validate lại là được. Chứ không cần là nhất thiết lúc nào mình cũng phải soạn một email thật là dài xong mình chờ approve, như vậy nó tốn thời gian hơn.
Mà ai là người document?
I want to call out in the English form.
Tại vì nãy giờ thấy liên quan tới những cái role chưa có làm rõ. Okay.
Say again, Jenny.
I wanted to call out in English that it talks about being efficient and effective here as well. So if we go back and think about the 3E model that we had discussed, economy having to do with money, and then efficiency and effectiveness, that lives in this manifesto. So if we haven't thought about it, this is an opportunity to integrate it from a different perspective. You'll see that they all kind of come together and become very, very similar or integrated. Number 7.
Phần mềm chạy tốt là chuyện đó chỉnh của tiến độ.
Nearly as bad as mine.
Nói tiếng Huế.
Đi thôi.
Yeah, and so everybody get that? It's a working product, working software is the primary indicator of progress.
I'm actually going to veto that one because
working software.
Lean UX did not exist then.
Okay.
But at that time, when this came out, it was just waterfall and that was it. So they wanted to say working software because they wanted MVP. MVP was a working software. So I want to edit this so that there's context of time. Now we have Lean UX. We have the ability to do user testing. So user testing, those are viable measures of progress as well. That's why number 7 is, we respect it, but there are changes and we're going to adjust this as well to accommodate that.
Maybe another way to think about it is we just talk about different phases of Leap's development. Like working changes, your definition of working, like your definition of done. Mới bắt đầu là the definition is launched and functional, but then what we're doing here is we're redefining what is working. Is it desirable, viable, feasible? Is it providing good efficiency, experience, effectiveness for the user? So we expand that definition of working as the company grows.
There was a question actually that I was doing some research last night, and when I looked at Agile, right, and it gave you that develop, test, deploy, I was like, that doesn't quite follow what
The rule that we did.
Yeah, right? It's like, wait, they're skipping the kind of prototyping piece unless you're calling that testing, but It
We'll
seems
talk
like
about that in a bit.
That's a complicated piece.
Yeah.
It's addressed in the workflow, I promise you.
Okay.
It's a great call out. Scrum alone cannot do it for you. And at this time, there has been a UX flow, kind of separate from a development flow. And so that's why we're here to try to integrate all the different pieces, because you make a great call out. That alone didn't do it. And that needed another iteration for success, because we saw it was great, it worked for the time, we saw progress. But today, Scrum alone will not solve your operational problem.
It's good because I was almost ready to paint it on the wall, and then I was like, wait, that doesn't really fit.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to the next, number 8, I believe.
Yeah. Number 8, các quy trình linh hoạt thúc đẩy phát triển bền vững. Cả nhà tài trợ, nhà phát triển và cả người dùng có thể duy trì một nhịp độ liên tục không giới hạn. Cái này có nghĩa là tất cả những cái stakeholder liên quan của mình đó, kể cả sponsor, kể cả những cái developers hay là mình involve luôn cả user, thì cái việc là mình daily collaboration và trao đổi thông tin như vậy á, nó sẽ giúp mình giữ một cái nhịp độ liên tục để cải thiện cái sản phẩm của mình. Thì cái điều này cho thấy là cái quy trình agile nó vừa linh hoạt và nó vừa giúp cho cái sự phát triển của mình là được bền vững hơn.
I also call out with this one in the English form, talking about a constant pace indefinitely. And wait, would you say that their current development flow is something you can keep doing forever, same exact way? So if you look at the last 3 months, is it comfortable for you to do the same exact amount of work in the same style in the next 3 months? And you can help me out with this one.
Yeah. Thì cho nên muốn hỏi là với cái kiểu giống như cái nhịp độ làm việc và cái workflow của team dev hiện tại á, thì ví dụ khi mà anh nhìn lại trong 3 tháng vừa rồi cái số lượng công việc như vậy, cái tiến độ công việc như vậy, thì anh có thể đảm bảo được là trong 3 tháng tiếp theo mình cũng sẽ làm được những cái việc tương tự như vậy hay không?
But comfortably. I know it's not what you do. Comfortably.
Thoải mái.
Yeah.
Thoải mái. Em định nghĩ là thoải mái.
Có nghĩa là em còn muốn tiếp tục với cái tiến độ, với cái sức nặng của công việc 3 tháng vừa rồi á, em còn muốn nó kéo dài sau này theo cái cách như vậy không? Em thấy có thoải mái như nào? Hay em còn muốn thay đổi?
Em nghĩ là phải thay đổi.
Thay đổi như nào?
Thay đổi theo cách làm sao?
Thay đổi như nào? Ok. Đầu tiên là mình phải fix những cái gì mình chưa fix. Ví dụ như là object chưa rõ ràng, responsibility mỗi mình chưa rõ ràng, quy trình mình chưa rõ ràng, contact point chưa rõ ràng, working agreement chưa rõ ràng, thì mình phải thay đổi chứ. Ví dụ như giờ anh làm việc ví dụ như tới 1-2 giờ đêm 3 tháng liền vừa rồi thì anh never happy before. Right, đúng không?
Yeah, but đó là cái câu trả lời đơn giản là can you sustain working till 1-2 a.m. in the morning with your team? Can they do that happily? Answer should be easy answer. No, that's not what we want. We need some balance, right? Yeah.
So this is a key one that I want to hone in on for development team. The rate that development has been going is not sustainable because of, the scheduling, the process, everything that Emily had mentioned. And so for the sake of streamlining their work, we're calling that out of how do we make it easier for dev team? Sustainable, not easier. How do we make it sustainable for dev team? Number 9. Okay.
Continuous attention to technical excellence and good design enhances agile. Okay. I think this point means because we are working in technology and software development, we have to be very innovative and quick and observe and learn and apply new technology, methodology, working methods to adapt with the fast-changing environment and to keep up with user needs.
I think that's true. If we break down in the Vietnamese or English, we think of the concept of agility, adjust and adapt. Technical excellence, how did we build it? Did we do it as elegantly and simply as possible with clear documentation? And then design. Was it designed for its purpose? Is it designed well? Because if we just, this is sometimes if we focus just on the commercial output, you can skip how it's built, or you can take shortcuts You have poor architecture là cái cột lồi là không có ổn định. Cái thiết kế là giống như we designed for the outcome rather than the process. So lúc mình có một cái vấn đề xảy ra mình không we can't forecast, it blocks our ability to adapt if we have not put investment into the technical architecture and the design.
Does it mean that we have to think like 2 steps ahead?
Yeah.
And different scenarios?
Yeah. Like the code base is something to think about. If you build on old architecture, you know it's going to be deprecated. And if you don't think about that, and you don't think at some point I have to stop adding new feature because I have to clean this up, at some point when that code base is deprecated, all your features stop working. And then what happens? That's catastrophic because then you don't even have an MVP, you don't have a functional product. Yes. So you have to juggle new feature with constant heat check. Is my product still technically stable? And in fact, like you have to think that if it's technically stable last year, is it still stable this year? Yeah, there's going to be changes, and there's what's that word? Technical debt that accrues. So you have to think, when do I fix that? And then you can solve that through good coding, but also through design in the process. And even what we're doing now, that's an element of design. We're designing the process. Yeah. But this will help us adapt to changes.
I think it's a trade-off between scalability
and speed. Yeah. Scalability and speed. That's the balance that we have to protect. Yeah.
Number 10.
Sự đơn giản là thiết yếu, nghệ thuật tối đa hóa lượng công việc không cần thiết. Đồng nghĩ đơn giản nó quan trọng cả hai việc. Trong việc mà cái giải pháp mình cung cấp cho khách hàng khi họ sử dụng ứng dụng của mình và cả cái quá trình mình tạo ra cái giải pháp đó, thì cái việc đơn giản nó cực kỳ quan trọng để giảm những cái tương tác hoặc là những cái công việc không cần thiết, để tiết kiệm nhân lực, tiết kiệm resource và tiết kiệm cả thời gian.
Number 11.
Cái kiến trúc tốt nhất, yêu cầu tốt nhất và thiết kế tốt nhất sẽ được làm ra bởi các nhóm người tự tổ chức. Nghĩa là vì những cái gì tốt nhất của team thì mọi người sẽ là chủ động active để làm. Ví dụ như tùy theo về cái team mình, cái structure như thế nào thì mọi người có thể là tự organize để mình có thể tìm ra được những cái kiến trúc tốt nhất và phù hợp cho cái team của mình, và những cái requirement hay những cái thiết kế đó tùy theo cái team mình với những cái label như thế nào mà mình có thể tự customize để làm cho nó mix được với cái team của mình, để sao mà cái team của mình có thể work được tốt nhất với những cái structure, những cái requirement đó.
Ben, are you online?
Wow.
Ben, số 12 đi.
Bình ơi,
He's muted. Unmute, Ben.
Bình em đọc số 12 đi Bình, em giải thích cái số 12 rồi.
Well, Rod, if you're on, you want to take number 12?
Rod. Hello.
Yeah.
Oh, Ben is on. Ben is on.
Yes,
Number
I'm back.
12. Oh.
Ben is on.
Number 12. Yes.
Okay.
Nhóm phát triển sẽ thường xuyên nghĩ về việc làm sao để trở nên hiệu quả hơn, sau đó sẽ điều chỉnh và thay đổi hành vi của mình cho phù hợp. Thì mình nghĩ cái này là khi mà mình làm á, thì mình sẽ luôn là suy nghĩ cái hướng mà nó sẽ là tối ưu nhất, rồi xong sau đó là mình cứ adjust, thay đổi, optimize để làm sao cho cái công việc nó ngày càng tiện ưu hơn, nó tối ưu hơn. Thì mình hiểu vậy.
So with this one, I'm not sure if the Vietnamese translation and the English intent is the exact same thing, right? Suy nghĩ, it could also just mean to think about it. But in this context, it means to actually have meetings and talk to each other, reflect and like share with each other. This is my insight of what it is. That is the purpose of the meeting of the retrospective, which I know a few months back, the dev team didn't even have time to do. And so if we don't even have time for the retrospective meeting, meeting, that means we're not properly running Scrum and we're not properly running Agile. So with this one, if you guys would like, you guys can set time on your own. I want to cut this short just because we do have other slides, but take time with each other and think about how has Leap thought about the manifesto or implemented parts of the manifesto in its culture or not, and how has Leap executed on the 12 principles, and what does it mean to Leap? So I take time on your own, set a lunch or something where you can discuss. Who here has actually read the manifesto and the 12 principles that Agile is based off of, which has influenced Scrum? Who read it before? There we go. You have 2-3 hands in the room. So there's an opportunity for all of us to see the culture and the mindset is coming from, right? If you are doing Scrum and you didn't read this from Agile, it's almost like you didn't know why to do this. So that's why I thought it was so important to share this with you. This is why Agile and Scrum even exists. Because someone saw a really crappy way of doing development and they wanted to make it better. And that's really the heart of it that I wanted to share with you. So now, for the sake of time, I'm going to go back and continue chatting through things, but I think most of these things are obvious, so let's all sit down and relax again. And we'll run through this quite quickly, because I do want to spend time with them. So let's jump into it. What is Scrum? What is the thing that you guys are currently using now? If we look at the difference between Scrum and Waterfall, like you saw with the Agile icon, Scrum is iterative. In the short 2 weeks that you guys are doing something, you are able to plan and release a feature. Maybe it's only in Sandbox, but you're still releasing it, right? And in production, it will be out very, very soon. As we discussed, Waterfall is step by step, and you never move backwards. So if you mess something up in design or development, it doesn't matter. You still have to go through with the testing, the maintenance, and execute on it. There's really no way to go back and fix a project without spending a lot more money, which generally speaking, in the past, people did not like to do. From a theoretical perspective, Scrum is an iterative approach with a clearly defined goal. Question, in your sprint, do you guys have a clear goal every sprint of what you're trying to achieve, not only in terms of the feature, but its impacts to the user?
Yes, I would say so.
Okay,
That's
really great.
We have a business outcome or the deliverable on the feature that we're wanting to have built, yes. Maybe it's not defined well enough, but as we go through this, but don't we've had it.
In the dev team, we have the goal for the sprint.
Perfect. So I think that's where we want to see the alignment, not only from the outcomes perspective, requirements perspective, from like a business orientation, but also from the developer's point of view. And so those goals must be aligned, and those goals must have a future as well, so that we know what we're building on. But that's really great to hear. At the end of every sprint, the development team ships a build. This doesn't need to be every 2 weeks. You could hold off a deployment into production, but essentially you should be deploying every 2 to 6 weeks is okay in order to fix things. What's our average deployment time? Is it after every sprint? Into production?
It depends on the function. If it big, maybe 2 string for big function, or small function. For small function, maybe 2 weeks or a week. If we have many small functions, we will deploy quickly, and it depends on.
So it depends on your feature.
Yeah.
But essentially, you will get something out within a few months. It sounds like you're never holding back, and it's absolutely great. There are 2 scenarios in which Scrum will work. That's if you have MVP, or you have a specific business value that you're trying to deploy. So just make sure that you think about it in terms of accountability. So I have to call it out that Scrum isn't perfect. While the good part is that it can be adaptable. You have collaboration and communication. You have self-organization. You try to automate everything. At other times, it doesn't work. Like Scrum doesn't always work for every team. So if you have a product like a medical equipment, you can't implement Scrum. Additionally, if you do not communicate, Scrum will fail because you won't be able to share all the requirements and execute things on time. If everyone in the room is not clear on Scrum, then its ability to be successful will diminish. So if Dev has to continually teach people what they're doing, that's going to cause them delays to finish their work. If you are a perfectionist, Scrum is not for you, and I don't think that's happening at least. And lastly, not taking in user feedback immediately will reduce the effectiveness of Scrum. So that's the thing that I want to call out for me, which is if we're not getting constant user feedback, not only in terms of product, but in terms of your feature idea, then we are not being as effective as we can be. Who has seen this Scrum framework before? Who recognizes this? It should be all of the dev team.
Yes.
Okay. So with this one, it's pretty standard. I think for those who've seen it, this is very repetitive, but for those who haven't, I just want to briefly go through it. You have your product backlog, which is every ticket that you have in Jira. You break it out into a sprint, usually 2 weeks worth of work. You plan what goes into that sprint. You do the sprint, you meet every day, and then at the end, you look at your product in your review. Lastly, you have a retrospective in order to make sure that anything that didn't go well, you are able to address. So with, based on this image, are we doing everything in this framework, every meeting?
Với cái khung Scrum này thì mình có rất là nhiều cái meeting và những cái phần trong đó thì là hiện tại mình áp dụng Scrum thì mình có làm được tất cả những cái bước này không?
Có em. Có em.
Dạ. Thì anh có thể chia sẻ cho mọi người một chút là mình đang làm thời gian là như thế nào?
Cái Scrum mà team mình đang apply.
Ok, thì cái đó mình sẽ có cái Scrum planning. Đầu tiên là planning, lúc đó mình sẽ xác định cái goal là gì đó, và sau đó là team người đã chuẩn bị backlog trước, lúc đó thì cho mấy bạn biết task trong đó, sau đó là phân thời gian viết chứ cái thời gian của mỗi team, rồi sau đó là mọi người chạy sprint, rồi sau đó mỗi ngày thì có daily meeting kéo dài khoảng 10 phút đó, rồi sau cuối sprint thì sẽ có review, thì tùy là có gấp quá hay không và nhìn vào mọi người có bị gây gắt quá nhau không, có gây gắt với nhau quá mà giữ kìm nén quá thì cho làm cái retro. Bởi vì
cái review thì lúc nào cũng có, nhưng mà
retro thì thanh khoản, bởi vì mình hơi bị gấp á. Đó nên là thường thì nếu mà chuẩn á, thì mình làm gần như là full cái đó, chỉ có retro là thanh khoản thôi.
So that everyone's aligned. Everything happens except retro, because that one, it depends on availability, it sounds like, in terms of scheduling. And in terms of the last, number 12 of manifesto, what did it talk about in terms of reviewing it and putting it back? And then in terms of this pro-con list, in terms of getting the feedback and then putting it back into your product. What happens when you don't have a retro?
You don't know what went right, you don't know what went wrong, you can't iterate. Iteration is the key for Agile. If there's no point where you check and say, did this work, did it not work?
Yeah. You have no way to diagnose yourself within a short period of time and fix it the next sprint. So technically speaking, every 2 weeks you can be making operational improvements. This isn't just feature, it's also in terms of, hey, product manager, this ticket was not sufficiently written, can you fix it? Or backend, you took too long to develop this API and it messed up front-end scheduling, and that really sucks. Those operational things need to be addressed and resolved, otherwise it can never be bubbled up. And so I suspect that not being able to have a retro is one of the reasons why the pain points from dev team aren't leaving the dev team. It's not being fixed, because if you're not acknowledging it, you're not addressing ways to fix it, how can you minimize the problem? How can you reduce it? Ryan, can you help me with the retrospective piece in Vietnamese?
Dạ, với cái retrospective á, em em không rõ là khi mà anh làm review thực sự là mình discuss những cái gì ở trong đó nha, nhưng mà trong cái khung Scrum này á thì mình chia ra là review riêng và retrospective riêng. Review là cái lúc mình đánh giá lại cái công việc mình tạo ra, còn đã chỉ làm cái đó thôi. Còn cái retro là mình sẽ
làm riêng.
Dạ, what's didn't work.
Đúng.
Dạ.
Làm
Là
riêng.
cái đó là cái
Đúng framework theo Scrum luôn.
Dạ. Vậy thì anh giải thích cho mấy bạn để hiểu chút nha. Cái retrospective á, là mình sẽ hỏi những câu như là trong quá trình cái sprint vừa rồi á, cái gì nó work, cái gì nó không có work, để mình tìm ra được là cái gap ở đâu, hay là còn những cái vấn đề gì mình chưa có biết, để mình kiểu là rút kinh nghiệm á, trong cái phần sprint về sau.
Và giải phán.
Không work là technical issue hay
nó là tất cả, tức là ví dụ trong quá trình mình làm cái sprint đó thì nó có vấn đề về lý luận mình hay là
tất cả luôn á, làm gì cũng tốt, và hay là thằng này emotion quá, hay là thằng này
đó cũng là một số cái vấn đề.
Nói chung là tất cả mọi thứ vấn đề trong team là sẽ được nói ở retrospective, ở nơi đó là mọi người có thể chia sẻ open và agree ban đầu là ở cái buổi đó diễn ra thì không có emotion ở đây đó, nên là chia sẻ thẳng thắn, ai bị nói thẳng mặt thì gắng chịu.
Nhưng mà cái cốt lõi á, cái output của cái buổi retro này là mình phải đưa ra được là làm sao để mình không gặp lại những cái lỗi này nữa, chứ không phải là mình chỉ ra lỗi rồi mình để đó.
Cái đó tụi anh follow đúng framework luôn, là what went well, what went wrong,
What can be improved?
yes.
But it's
In
not
terms
just
of the retro, then I guess I ask the question: why are there still problems on dev team if there's a retro that's happening that is supposedly effective? Because it doesn't make sense to me that dev team has all these problems externally. They have a retro to address these problems, but nothing's getting fixed, right?
Because there's different levels that this has to be done at. This should be done as a team. This whole team here is part of this production and development environment, but you also have within your own team too. We've learned about two assets that you can use. The first one was week one, was working agreement. The second one was your homework assignment on Monday, which is what is my team's definition of done, right? So you can do things according to the working agreement, and you can get things done according to your definition. But if how you got there causes pain, discomfort, or inefficiency, you have to be able to adjust the working agreement or maybe look at the definition of done. Because the point is that if you never go back to that, it means that you think you were right the first time you tried it.
Yeah.
And then Jenny's question is, okay, great, you're doing it internally at dev, but are you doing this collaboratively with the whole team? Because a lot of
Not
the
even
problems
collaboratively.
are not
The whole team.
Are you addressing
the
the
whole
problems that are affecting you that might not be in your day-to-day? So it can be all team, and I agree that there needs to be an all-team retro. That's just a good management practice. But if you're having problems with UX, if you're having problems with business requirements, that should be addressed, or that can be addressed in retro. And then from there needs to be action to solve that problem, so that you can say, I don't like this workflow from the requirements. It's too big, the timeline's too tight. So I'm going to bubble this up to the necessary stakeholders on other teams, and that's the action that comes from the retro. If it's only always within, you guys are only solving the problems within the team that you have, not if problems are coming from outside of your team. And I think that's where maybe the team doesn't feel as doesn't have the touch point, right? There's no touch point for you to say, I addressed this problem in retro, and I want to solve this with all of the team history today. But at the end of the day, if it's addressed to retro, it should be bubbled up to other team members outside of the dev team. Does that make sense, though? Where I'm coming from with a solution for that?
How could you guys apply it to? How could you guys apply it to your practice right now? Let's say you have a sprint coming up. At what point, like, if you guys aren't doing this already, how do you see this being applied?
I think there's always problem in the team about communication and collaboration, about the team members' emotions. But I think we are doing improvements gradually to improve it. Like for example, previously we have a lot of tight deadline, but we feedback to other departments, and we, as a product manager, we are going to handle the task slow down to the developers, so they don't have to be stressed out.
So what the review retro that Jenny's talking about, like the problem solving that you're describing that you have with Fuxen, like it's like you deal with the problem as it arises. What this framework is suggesting is that if you only deal with it when it arises, you depend on how comfortable are you going and having that conversation. It's personality over process. But what this is saying is that it's an opportunity for Leap to build in as part of the process. Like somebody has to say, hey, we don't start the next sprint until we have this retro meeting and we go around the table and talk about it. Because otherwise, it depends on how comfortable are you raising the issue. But if you make it part of the process, like just like what we said with research, make sure we do all the primary and secondary research before we take it to the next level. This is the same thing. It's saying let's make sure we do a retro and review before we move on to the next iteration.
I think culturally we have a system in place for all projects, not just dev, but we debrief within 48 hours of any project. That's been something we've done for years, and that's pretty well established in our culture. I think what I'm hearing in this though is I know he is doing that, but it is with his team instead of bringing in the other stakeholders, and I think that's the small adjustment that we're looking for. Is just bringing in the other stakeholders, but this concept is something that's actually already pretty well established. Yeah.
Great. So I'm going to move into the roles of it and get a little bit detailed in here so that we can understand how we is splitting things. So in the last week we had talked about last Monday we talked about the org chart and how, in my eyes, there's a bit of a misalignment. Because in the traditional roles here, you have a product owner or a product manager, however you want to name it. You have your scrum master, someone who can be on the outside and help you lead, and then you have your development team. And so infrastructurally, you have a leader in the room, or you have a product person in the room and an IT person in the room, and they hold like very comparable weight. And so if I take this back to the org chart, I think right now we don't have the right weight for a scrum master and product owner. Everything's leaning towards dev team in terms of leadership and capacity. And I think there's an opportunity for us to shift towards having someone from the outside observe how things are going, and then also a product owner who can really take the idea, the vision of a product and carry that forward, be the center point of this project. Because generally speaking, the product person will be the one who is in between of business requirements and dev team. They'll also talk to UX, they'll talk to users, they'll talk to business stakeholders. That product owner has touch points with every single person, so they become the centralized hub of information. That is their value for the development team. So dev team can just say, this business requirement makes no sense, and the PO can essentially go out and figure that out. And instead of having the head of dev having to, let the product person know and then talk to the UX person and then go back to the, whoever developed the requirement. And then with Scrum Master, it's usually not there. I'll be frank, this is not a role that's visible in most organizations. But how could we have someone in place of a Scrum Master? What neutral leader can we have in a room to support with operations, pain points, with ideas? So I'll throw that with you guys. What is your viewpoint of the balance? Is it similar to what I just said?
Có đồng ý với cái bạn trên người nói xa không?
Do you agree with my husband?
I agree with this. I'm currently the product manager is playing the role of Scrum Master and product owner at the same time. So probably we do that, but some projects or some they split in different features as well. So most likely the product manager play this role, that two roles at the same time.
Mm-hmm. And if you split the product managers, that also means that no one person actually knows what's happening with everything. You don't need a person writing the ticket to know what's happening with the product, right? You don't need the granular person in charge. But at this time, there's no person with the lead hat in here. So this is where, when we talk about org chart, when we talk about process, how can we shift some of the work that product has had to do, both of product and Scrum, and then how do we shift some of the weight off of dev team? so that other team members can do more of the collaborative touch points with all the other stakeholders. That will be up for you guys to review. Do you guys have any questions on this?
Another question I have on back on the retro, as you call it. We do a debrief within 48 hours of every project. You mentioned that in the retro, no sprint should move forward until after it's done. Is there a time frame that a retro should be done, and what are the specific, what's maybe the framework or the outcomes, objectives that you're looking for in an effective retro?
Yeah. So in terms of the main 4 meetings that are cyclical, you could literally follow this meeting. On Monday, you have your planning. You go through 8 days of daily stand-ups, where you meet every day. And then on that Friday, before you deploy, you review the product in the morning, and then you have a retrospective in the evening. Depending on what you are implementing, the review will usually be about an hour to 2 hours. Depends on how many features you have. For the retro, it also depends on how much baggage you have to work through, how many problems you have to solve. But I've seen those go as long as 3 hours. I only recommend 2 hours tops for energy purposes though. But if you schedule that cyclically, it always happens, and you always know this. None of the meetings should be moving around. It should always be scheduled in the calendars. And if you can't do the retro on Friday, then you figure out how to push it to Monday and then push out the plan for later. But this is the order of things.
Is there a framework for the retro meeting that has an outline of what you're going to follow?
Yeah, let me share. Hold on. Retro perspective.
And when we talk about key stakeholders, you mentioned the people in this room. Would that mean literally we're bringing in all head of departments, or
I think you can make it leaner. So if you're talking about the leadership team, then I would say you can have it every. You could probably do it every month and get away with that to begin with, just because too many meetings would be tough. But it would be like top of the month, have a planning. What are our objectives for the month of September? And then towards the end of the month, how did we do? So if you take and strip what Scrum does, the essence of it is what worked, what didn't work, how can we improve? Those are the 3 things that you're trying to accomplish. And so if you have your all-team planning for the month, and then you end the month with an all-team retro, then you're able to address the last 4 weeks of the work in a very cyclical and scheduled manner. And that way you can address any cross-functional problems that might be happening in that meeting after having tried something different. And it gives you opportunity to always be iterating. If you have more time, I'd actually say every 2 weeks is really lovely, because then you get to catch things sooner. And from a tension perspective, you don't have as much pressure building up.
We do debrief, and that's the framework of it. What went right, what went wrong, how do we make it better? The point is in this, I think we're talking specifically about the previous sprint.
Yeah.
Only
you're focusing on what backlog items were addressed in the sprint.
Okay. That helps. Okay.
Yeah. So it's not a general airing of grievances. Right. It's specifically, hey, what came out of the product backlog that was then passed into the dev backlog that was then selected for sprint. So we can break through each stage of that. How was it briefed? How was it tested? How was it passed?
Perfect. That's what okay.
And then this is like, it doesn't, I mean, I'd say for speed and implementation, this is about giving the mandate to a Scrum Master and kind of set the tone and hold everybody accountable. This thing's going to be like herds of cats.
Exactly, otherwise it's a bunch of grievances and it's not focused.
The Scrum Master is the one that leads that meeting. This is when we start moving beyond what the main process in the sprint. It's like, hey, let's stick a pin in that. That's a management meeting. That's a process meeting. Perfect. Yeah. Sorry, Jenny.
And to visualize it, so if you look at the product backlog here, you'll see that every color represents a different sprint. The purple sprint is what you address in a sprint itself, right? Sprint backlog. And in a retrospective, you would discuss what happened within the purple tasks. So that's why you have to have a clear objective. In order to get to this point, you have to plan that. And so if we're talking about everyone in this room, you have to know what was your goal for the month, and at the end of the month, did you hit it? Why or why not? And so it gives you a regular cadence in which you can reflect upon. In Scrum, you've already said it, that every 2 weeks, you have your certain tasks. And there is a retro that's happening at a broad level. So internally on the dev team, things are running as smooth as they can be. But if we take this and think of it in terms of the whole organization, I don't think we've been able to do that yet, and that's definitely an opportunity to make it a cyclical thing, not just with the product release. It's ongoing regardless. And then you can have additional, postmortems as you release the product. That will be a little bit different. Okay, just to clarify the roles, and I think everyone is clear about this, a product owner is the one who holds the vision for the product. The Scrum Master is one who helps the team best use Scrum. And the Scrum team members, also known as development team, they're the ones that actually build the product. From my understanding, these 3 roles are very mixed with the team. Would you say that's correct? I've already heard that's PO and Scrum in the case. But because sometimes dev team has to understand more of the vision, like they're the ones calling out the more vision, the product. So if that's the case, I think what's happening now is the roles are very blended, and it depends on who has experience. And Wayne has a lot of experience, so he knows, oh, this isn't the right vision for the product, go find the vision, or this requirement is incorrect. But if that's the case, in that moment, he's actually wearing the product owner hat. If he then also has to facilitate his team to run Scrum, then he is acting as the Scrum Master. And Wayne not only has to do the work of head of IT, he also is a developer, and then has to switch between Scrum Master and Product Owner depending on the task that he's doing. If the lanes are not clear, it just makes it harder for people to know who owns what. The Product Owner should be the one that says, I take the requirements, I talk to everyone, I create the vision, write the ticket, dev team gets it. And dev team gets these clean tickets, and they run with it. There's no back and forth. If the requirements get messed up, as the product owner, the person holding the vision, I'm the one that's responsible for making it better next time. And otherwise, it's going to fall onto a Nguyen or someone outside of the scope of Scrum. And even then, Nook, do you attend all of the ceremonies on dev team every day?
No.
So even then, like Nook is acting a little bit like a product owner to gather requirements, but he's not part of the team doing all the ceremonies. So you have all these gaps of information. If you have a set of people going to all the ceremonies, talking to all the people, that's how you can have a point person for the information on hand. And I think that's where cleaning up those lanes is what's really beneficial for Leap. I want to transition towards Nook's presentation. Before I do that, though, do you guys have any specific questions on this? Yes, Hung?
I have a question about the Scrum ceremonies. We intend to add in Scrum grooming into the ceremony.
That's a good point. Thank you for bringing that up. So as you see here, there are 4 ceremonies here. There's an additional 5th one that's kind of unofficial. It's called a refinement or grooming. You guys don't do that every 2 weeks?
We want to do it every 2 weeks, so we don't have to go back and forth with the developers anymore, because we have grooming, we have technical advice from team lead. And we want to do it every Thursday, 2 weeks.
Yeah, so if we look at this example here, I don't know if you can see my pointer, I don't think you can. The second Thursday, before the retrospective and the review, that blue and pink flag, that second Thursday, that's when you would have your grooming. You technically could do it on the Wednesday or Tuesday, but it's usually the week before you groom, so that on the following Monday, the red flag, you execute on that. Do you not refine your tickets at this time?
I want to do it on the Thursday, the first week of the sprint, so we have time to adjust it during the week, during the second week, so we are ready for the next Monday. Is it right?
If it works for your team, I'd say just execute it. When do you guys currently have it? Not at all?
Oh, not yet.
Yes. I think that will unblock you guys so much from a product perspective if you don't have a grooming yet. That one is not a part of the cycle because you don't do it every day, but it is one of the ceremonies that is proven to be effective. So prior to any sprint, we'll talk about the technique. Otherwise, your planning is going to be way too long.
Jenny, do you want me to clarify a bit about the grooming and the blending?
Sure.
Dạ, em có nghe anh Nguyên nói là cái grooming này nó hơi lạ với mọi người. Thì thường là cái grooming này là mình làm trước cả khi planning được. Grooming có nghĩa là cái lúc mình coi như cái công tác chuẩn bị trước khi mình lên một kế hoạch ha. Thì khi mà mình làm công tác chuẩn bị á, thường là mình sẽ review những cái tiết kiệm mà nó có trong cái backlog của mình. Mình coi thử là requirement mình nó đã rõ ràng hay chưa, mình cần clarify cái gì nữa. Thì ví dụ như chị Hương nói á, là mình hay có bị misalignment giữa team product và team dev, dẫn tới việc là mình cứ bắt em forth liên tục như vậy á. Thì thay vì cái việc là mình lên một kế hoạch xong xuôi rồi mà team dev người ta nói là mình là cần clarify chỗ này chỗ kia, thì cái grooming này á, nó sẽ là cái thời gian giúp mình ngồi lại trước, mình họp để mình clarify tất cả những cái tiết kiệm trước. Sau đó thì khi mà mình có một cái requirement rõ ràng hơn rồi á, thì mình bước vào cái meeting planning. Thì lúc đó là cái lúc mà mình chỉ ngồi mình bàn là ok, từ những việc này bây giờ mình để mà ra được outcome này mình cần làm cái gì. Thì planning nó chỉ là lên kế hoạch, có thời gian rõ ràng, có timeline, có workforce cụ thể thôi. Còn sau đó thì tới những bước tiếp theo thì mọi người biết là mình có họp hàng ngày, mình có daily scrum rồi, mình có review sau một sprint và mình có retrospective sau một sprint. Yeah.
Okay. If you guys don't have a grooming, implement that. That's why the tickets are a bit too loaded, I think, from my observation of it. Any other questions about Scrum?
I have a question, Jenny.
Uh-huh.
About the
Yes.
12 principle. Is that what you mean? Like everybody in this team should have that mindset, and if we get that together, we can apply this easier. Is that correct?
Absolutely. If you don't have that agile mindset, Scrum is really difficult because people don't believe in what you're doing, right? And it's like with lean and design thinking. It's a mindset of trying to do things different. And with this one, you can systematize it. So for instance, number 12 is the retrospective. But it's not even just the team reflection now. We're talking about this entire group's reflection with the group's efforts. So it's not just the dev team anymore. And agile means something different. It's not just Scrum.
This is kind of a lot. So, and also there is some point in there. I'm sure that we will have the debate between different departments or even the dev and business as well. So should we pick, or we need to align all of these, or we pick some of them?
I see what you're saying. You do not have to implement it for all teams. So the way that I would approach it is use this as a starting point for working agreements. Each team should have their own working agreement. Marketing has a working agreement, dev has a working agreement, etc. And then from there, you can have a collective one that you would do for all of these. So culturally, you would know that maybe the priority is, again, customer and simplicity and attention to technical excellence, whatever you guys think are important. And it goes back to the question that I asked you, Luke, about UX. What is your philosophy on it? What is the culture that you want to build at Leap? So you don't have to implement every single point. It's more about take inspiration and turn it into something that you can use within your operation. Low-hanging fruit, working agreement, right? Second low-hanging fruit, meetings or touch points that would accomplish these things so that you don't have to even think about it. Number 12 is the perfect example. If you have a retrospective on all teams, you have the regular interval of reflection. You don't need to think about it. You don't need to put in your working agreement. Does that make sense? Is that doable?
Jenny, I'll work with the team after the election with Huynh, like we've been doing, to break this down into like a homework application, homework framework that they can collaborate on and report back to us.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's important because as Randy mentioned before, with Agile, it's like the team before, we kind of already applied that in the past, but in the Agile is also pro and cons. So at least everybody in the same mindset and we agree with that, like it's working agreement. If not, we cannot go. Example, like we apply this really good with our agency company because we are clients of them. So we own great priorities for them. And most of the very principle, when I read this, like they apply really well. But when we move to the internal team, if they get that mindset as well, and we on the same page, it could happen a lot.
We'll talk about how to break this up and apply it. And then now we have our as-is workflow.
Okay.
This just goes to, I don't want to scoop Jenny, but in part of the next steps is we have to, you guys, your job is to figure out which elements you want to implement and agree on it to be workflow. And recognize that whatever you decide on, we talk about iteration. We try it. If we don't like it, we change it. Right? We're not going to get it right the first time.
Yeah.
But the good news is because we have already some departments using best practices and getting good results, it makes it easier to use that as a teaching methodology for the other departments, right? So Dev has some great things, marketing has some great, we just need to now start piecing it all together and utilizing those systems across all of the different departments, like this slide.
So I wanted to transition to notes. I know that we're short for time, but if you guys can extend, then I'd love to stay on the call so that we can actually talk about UX, since we couldn't do it on Monday. The next step is to figure out how do you guys integrate these things. And now you have all the components. You have everything you need to create a to-be workflow. You just need to look at the as-is for a little bit more. If we look at the 3 different frameworks that we've already discussed, what do they have in common? How can we integrate them? You've already seen a workflow that integrates all of them already, so you know it's possible. You can have a start of design thinking and a Lean UX loop and Scrum that's part of the test, right? But these are the elements. How could you integrate them?
I think it's a big question in a lot of things. So let's, before we think about the individual elements, think of these 3 frameworks: design thinking, Lean UX, and Scrum. First, think about your team. Think about your team workflow and where, the start of your work starts where, and then where does it end? Where are the touch points? And then think about how can I apply elements from this to each phase of my work. This isn't something that you can just answer in 30 seconds, right? And this is why we're having everybody do your as-is workflows, because when you have that in front of you, you can see really clearly, where can I apply this? The design, for example, if I'm going to pretend to be Randy for a second, and I know my pain point is I'm getting sucked into a lot of detailed meetings, right? Especially when it's my job to come up with critical ideas that support the business strategy. But then I'm getting pulled into meetings and I'm talking about wireframes, I'm talking about product details, and then we recognize that, hey, we haven't done any recalls of any of these features. So I can use design thinking, at least in my first touch point with my product team. I can define my ideas, I can make sure that we're prototyping in a non-dev environment. I can test it, insist on testing, and say, hey, before it goes to dev, we need to do primary research, secondary research, before we go to implementation. That's where I can take design thinking and apply it to my workflow as a business stakeholder. And that's kind of in my own head. And then how do I apply Lean UX and Scrum to that? Well, I can feed that workflow into Scrum when I'm working with my team on the product backlog. For example, I can insist that, hey, one thing that we have to do is, are we finishing in this sprint? Are we finishing the feature testing, the UX testing on this product before it goes to implementation? So when I'm having my business and product meeting, I'm saying in these 2 weeks I have these 3 feature ideas. I want to make sure that they're user tested and secondary research tested before we introduce it to dev's backlog. That's like a way you could do it. But again, I'm doing this verbally. It's a lot easier to do when you have your asset in front of you.
And I'd actually say with this one, like the discussions that I included in the deck, you guys have that? Take the time to actually whiteboard them. Sit in the room, spend an hour and think, okay, well, how What do they have in common? How could we try applying it? What could it look like today? Break it up, put it together. If I were to combine it, for instance, that whole scrum from planning to retro, you could stick that into make for leading UX. So I've just combined two workflows into one, right? That whole scrum thing lives in make. And so when you think that's the planning, you make, that's your sprint, you check, you implement, you do the review. It's literally the same thing with different words. So that's the kind of connections that I want you to take time in the upcoming week. We'll explore that on Monday as well. What can we put together? How do they cross over? How do they align? And that way you can create the 2B workflow that acknowledges all the pain points that you've been experiencing, have more testing, have more feedback that goes to the entire company, not just within your own team. Do we have more time so that Luke can share his insights from UX? Everyone?
Yeah, I think we should do that.
Yes. Let me stop sharing screen.
Cái này vậy đúng không? Được rồi. Zoom lên xíu đi. Rồi tí xả phun ra. Mua ở trên kìa.
Okay. We will go through this. After learning the skill process and from thinking, design, and lean UX, we do this audit what we currently have and what we don't. So let's go with some question from psychology and process. Okay. So what makes UX what makes great UX to lead? So probably I had this. I also checking with Jenny about the priorities ticket, that metrics that we can apply for lead. This is the template model from the UX. So depend on different features, we can prioritize in different points. So we know which feature is important. So this one is the as I discussed with Jenny and she also get back. So we need to she need to understand more on the business side and get some advice on what we will get final on the weight, or we can add on some more categories. So currently here is had 5 basic categories. So this is the pain of user, customer impact, upsell revenue from the existing customer, the new revenue, the revenue from the new customer, or the 4 will be the product, the key product difference, and the competitive necessary. So this is kind of 5 main categories to prioritize one ticket of features. So based on this, so we want to apply this for all the departments. Before they raise any requirements or ticket, they can evaluate the importance of the features by themselves only, and then we will get more discussion. So I think by the end of this training, we can get the final metrics that everybody agree on that, and we know clearly how to rank. So it will be much easier for the product team and development team to prioritize any ticket. Okay. Then, so this I also ranking from like currently we base mostly the value of the features and usability, adaptability, and usability ranking from 1 to 4. So the first one now is what is most valuable for user and then usability.
How do you define? Sorry, if you went into that. How do you define valuable to user?
The,
It's valuable to user, not valuable to
yes,
the business.
yes. So first is that's why we always come up from the problem, from the pain points. So that's what I say. What we think now is we come up with some problem, and we try to find a solution for it. So the idea is we always first priority is on user. On my side, and what we see is what can process leave in missing and can have leave successful. We see is the data research before data research and user testing before development. That is the key missing.
But especially if your first value is user value and you're not doing user testing, it's hard to that. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So that's why we missing and get more insight to validate. The key is we don't get the validate the idea yet. So sometimes we come up from experience. So we know it needs some more database and data research to prove that it's correct. Then the second one is the measurements after development and data tracking analysis. So that is kind of two critical part that I think those is critical, both critical to improve the lead and make it successful. Okay. For the skill and tools that we currently have, as I said, define the problem. We always come up from this, and the general ideas we always come up with how we can simplify and find a better ways for users to get their fitness outcome. And we come up with from the problem that user experience seems like they cannot find the fitness expert, they don't know how to find a fitness expert. It's hard for them to find the gyms or exercise. For the club partner, is the management tool. So we come up from different point of view and different problems that users are experiencing, and we come up with some solution that, as I said, based on our experience and what we think is good. So we build up the first MVP product. Strategy. This one I'm kind of using here. The first one I put a mission here is we applying the intelligence to solve those problems for user. So that is what kind of our main strategy. I don't know what Randy wants to input in, but it's our strategy to solve the user problem. We be using the intelligence and technology to solve those problems.
I'm not quite fully following your question.
So the question is what the skill and tools that we have for company strategy to solve the user problem. So our mission is applying the technology and intelligence to solve the pain point of user.
Are you speaking out of the whole company, or are you speaking
I'm
for
still
the
a little bit
US?
confused on what you're.
So I get what you were asking, but I'm asking in this audit, are you sharing your perspective in terms of speaking for Leap, or are you speaking for the UX team?
I see on my UX.
Okay, so then I actually think that it's you were asking what's Randy's input on this, but Randy's not part of the UX team. Okay, Randy's the business team. So
Empathy, therapy. Is we try to understand the pain points and problem from users and help them to achieve the certification and achieve their needs. The personas, I think this we already set up. We have some journey map and copywriting. Currently, we don't have any format on product team. That's one of kind of two missing. Research and testing tool that we have. So we always do the secondary research. That is, we always do, but not always document it and store it at the same one place. I think that one is missing. This is the sample that we do for the research in the team. Then, primary research. This I put in really two samples at the beginning. We do with the research survey for the trainers and customer. But currently we don't do this.
How many respondents did you have for this?
For the users,
For PTs? How many PTs did you survey for this?
around 300 to 500.
Wow, okay. And then how about for the customers?
Customer is more than that, more than 1,000. So
And then when
every
was this-
PT, we take the clients of the PT, like 3 to 5 clients from one PT, and do the research.
And then when was this done? You said beginning of the project. When did this happen?
It's in California, long time ago.
2 years.
The demo part, normally we do the demo by using the Marvel. So we do this for internal team. So the missing part, we don't do this for the user. So every feature of tickets, then we create a demo using like a vision, and then people can test functions like that. Usability testing. This one currently we only do after the development. So until we have the function work and ready, and we deploy. And
You only test in the
Yes.
production stage.
Yes. User interview. This is we do in different department and categories. For the customer, we get that from the customer experience team. PP normally I do it, and then other departments we get me or PM doing that.
When does this happen?
The interview.
Yeah.
For the customer part, like we collect the feedback after they using product. So it's in after the development.
In person, or at the survey, or the
Yeah, phone.
call?
Yeah.
There.
Okay. For the design, yeah, this is we get internal feedback from every UI. We don't do the user survey. I think this is the same with what we so.
Bill, can you help us with a little bit more detail of this one, which I totally missed? Could you add one note about the frequency of when these things happen, so that we see that it happens, but we actually don't know when? And for specifically the research, that will help us figure out what framework to test for the to-do. So if you're only doing feasibility testing every, like 2 months, for example, then we would figure out what cadence might work better.
Okay.
So we're all user interviews, user group interviews, surveys. We want to know how often you deploy, and then also where does that data live? Because I see you link the survey, but where does the data, the feedback live? So we need to see how you design the survey.
I also suggest that we put a goal into it. Like we have a goal to do usability, right?
Go for
Maybe-
the survey or
Yeah, for the survey, for the testing, because we always want to know some specific insight from the interview or the test.
okay. For the A/B testing, currently we don't do that because most we don't have the testing after the development.
Yeah.
This part is we add on a bit and also assess one skill or research that we also brainstorming during doing the information structure and user flow.
Is this something that you do currently, or you would like to do?
Currently.
Currently, you do.
So normally we do the brainstorming and flow, discussing on what the behaviors or user flow that we did. So we create
Can it allow a template, or just whenever you have an idea, or when does this happen?
It's normally every feature that we do that.
Whenever we have a feature to be
Request.
done.
Design tool for the user flow, we're using micro or diagram, art, mockup and wireframe, vision level is the and UI we use Sketch and Figma. But probably currently we only have one UX UI using Sketch. Figma we did that before, but not. For the document and research documents, currently probably not stored in one place at all.
Does it mean it just lives on the feature lead's personal laptop, or?
Yeah, some and yeah.
Okay.
Also, some research we get a document, some we did. So the gap analysis, as I put in the beginning, is the missing the data research and data tracking after. Also, I adding here one part is automation and A/B testing tool. I will also missing.
What do you want to automate?
The testing,
like pushing the survey, user feedback.
Yes. And A/B testing as well. We don't have that internally. What can we do? More research, more surveys, centralized documents, and public for all team members. So key benefit of that is we can understand more insight of user, reduce the workflow of the dev team, and this is the resource that we need that for all the plan that we raised. So for this part, probably is based on these components. Most likely we had more of them, but some quick process or like.
I'm curious, for every feature that you develop, do you have like a due diligence checklist, or just like, if let's say I get something from Randy, I get something from Active Media, and then I get something that you guys are working on. Does each feature get worked up identically? You do all the same steps for each feature before you pass on to dev?
Not like full follow the 100%.
Okay.
Some part in there we skip.
Yeah.
Like give it that depend on the type and the size of the feature. Some feature is big and often we need to do full flow.
You segment your feature, like you classify the feature. Like so, for example, if I say this is an update, or this is a plugin, or this is a transaction page, do you, like I'm trying to understand your workflow. So do you categorize it, and then each category has a workflow that you do for it, or is it kind of figure it out as you go?
Like the features we split in to different level. I think that is the really big feature we call it an epic, right? And then we divide it into smaller or one epic we get different small features, and we follow based on those. And some just improvements, small improvements to buy small.
And then does business and dev, do they use the same terminology, or do they know how you guys categorize? Or is that just an internal thing that you do within product and UX?
product UX and that.
Product UX. So Biz doesn't know.
Yeah, Vision is missing his own.
I think he missed a lot of stuff. Sometimes don't understand him and me too. And I have to a meeting and see what is the meaning they want. And sometimes I feel like he just make something very fast and don't think deeply inside the meaning of it.
Well, so for us, like if we're using the Tillerman method, what you guys are doing right now is this is your discovery. You find out what do you have, like complement, right? Like in terms of resource. We can't say yet what is the root cause because what we're missing is parallel structure.
Yes.
So I go back into like you have these components. So I want to know for every type of feature you have a standard of work that occurs for each of these components for each feature. And the question is yes or no. If yes, then that's something we can look at. We can say, is that framework sufficient or not? If no, then it means that for each feature you have so you cannot compare them. Right? So even as an outsider in the room, I don't know yet. Right? So we want to look internally. How do the three of you, when you receive a request from business, how do you segment it, and what is the workflow that you assign to it? This is a critical list here. These are critical components that define the feature that you can then assign to dev. But if you do it a different way for each feature, then yeah, absolutely, I understand dev pain point. And then also, if business doesn't understand that you break them up into these components, then it's impossible for business to give you full requirements on the first go. Then you have to go back and forth, or you're guessing. And if you guess wrong, then it creates rework.
For the features, like you want me to break that into like big, medium, and small features.
I want to know how do you do it. How do you do it right now?
Okay.
Yeah, because I can't recommend for you how to change it, or your team can't recommend how to change it unless you know how.
For the you tell like we need to break down into like features. What is the components we apply
that you pay attention to?
Okay, so we can do some different sample or different.
And then the other parts for your process, the resources and tools, Jenny had the important call out. Like we need to know what's the frequency, like when do you do it. So we know what you do. Now we want to know when do you do it.
Okay.
Right? Because some of them may be duplicating effort. Some of them need to be happening more often. Some of them may not need to be happening as often. Right? Okay. Yeah. And then, but otherwise, you let us know. Yeah, who are the stakeholders involved? What's happening? It's great. Just add a little bit more detail there. Jenny, thoughts?
I think this is a wonderful starting point, and it's going to give us more insights as to where to look. So definitely, like, this is a lot of information that we need. I think the part that's going to be tough that I will want you guys to pull from next week, and we're going to do less. We're going to do less training workshops and more active, like solution
application
creation in the upcoming month. I actually want you to share what the whole process looks like. Like, you give me an example of a recent feature that you deployed so that we can actually break it down, so that it's not just this report that we're seeing, but we see the raw material, which is all the steps that you took, the messages that you had, et cetera, and that will really give you a black and white picture of what happened. Otherwise, this is based on memory, this is based on your sense of how things are. But the only way we'll know for sure is, this is the proof, this is the validation from all team members, et cetera, et cetera.
You remember when Dan did the as-is workflow? There's that one step where product and UX develop the idea as a concept. I don't think anybody outside product and UX actually know how that happens. And so that's what this is. You're going into further detail to show us that process.
Yeah.
Because we were using feature requests to development, that's our sample. Right? So now we want to drill into how does product and UX handle this.
Yeah. Especially since there's a little bit of insight for like next steps and what we think we can develop. I think that's exactly the mindset that we need to have. That said, I actually want to see, well, why did you come up with that? Is it just from looking at the deck that you're like, oh, we don't do it, let's do it? I would look back at what features you have and see if that solution is actually what you need. Otherwise, you just create a solution to solve a problem that doesn't exist. So I want to problem find you. Okay. Luke, do you have more to share from your side?
That is.
Perfect. That's it? Okay. Thank you for that. I'm going to kick you off real quick so that I can talk to everyone face to face. Okay, so this was quite a long meeting, and this is one of our last alignment trainings that we have. They're a bit slow, and they're not as productive as I want them to be. So what I'd like to do is, Lee, tell me who is in charge of product operations, writing tickets, anything related to the product owner. I will have a separate meeting for you in regards to the development of tickets and user story mapping, because that's not related to everyone. So we'll have a separate meeting with a smaller group of people. Who can help me define who should be in that? I know project managers should be in it. That would be helpful if you're in it. Anyone else involved in ticket writing specifically?
As the new product flow, everything now goes to Dang first, so it's Dang, and then I don't know.
Now should be in it, but yeah.
Somebody from IT.
So whoever writes tickets, whoever sends requests and puts tickets in the backlog, we will set some time next week outside of training to discuss product-related things, because I don't want to use some people's time. And that way we'll get through a couple of things without having everyone needing to be there. Next week, we're going to start working on the development of things and pushing things further. So it's not going to be me coming with slides. It'll be more of a, all right, let's dive deep. What did we find from the org chart? What problems did we see? It'll look similar to the audit, but this time it's very solutions-oriented. We'll try to figure out how to drive the workflow forward. So next week, prepare to figure out how to integrate design thinking, Lean UX, Scrum, because we'll be acting on it to create a 2B now, not just learning everything that we had to do to get alignment with everyone.
What will? So I have a request for the team. So let's review the homework that has been assigned over the last 2 weeks. Because if we have everybody that has the same pieces at the table, it makes this conversation very interactive and very fun. So what do we have already? We have the high level as-is workflow for feature requests to production. That's done. We asked everybody to produce a team working agreement. And then this week we assigned everybody to define for us, how does your department assess definition of done? Additionally, last week we assigned that now that everybody has seen the as-is workflow, go into your department, the department's contribution to that workflow, and build one for the team to see. So that's what Product and UX was showing us in this inventory. And we want to see actually what is within your team, UX, product manager, users, how does that work? Because what happens is next week we sit at the table, everybody's got their resource in front of them, your colleagues see how your team does your work, and then we can start seeing, okay, which concept are we going to apply where? So again, review the as-is workflow, produce an asset for your team, like meet with your team and say, okay, this is our contribution to that workflow. Show up with your working agreement, show up with your definition of done. And then also, if you can produce an inventory of the resources, management resources that you use right now. So if you're doing meetings, what are your team ceremonies? When do they occur? When do you do your planning? When do you do your stand-up? When do you do review retro? Do you do brimming? Or if you have things that are not in that framework, what are the project management assets that you use? And how often do you use them? Because what we're going to also start doing is try to get some, not everybody has to do everything the same way, but if we reduce the variance across teams, then it becomes a lot easier to work together and apply these concepts.
Yep.
Great. So may I ask that you defend that assignment with everybody, make sure everybody knows? Great. Great. Yeah.
Okay, well that's it for me. Monday we'll start making things.
When we had the training for how to write
ticket.
When?
Well, it will be one of the off days, not Monday or Thursday, but I'd like to do it next week if you guys are available. Tuesday, Wednesday, are you available at that time?
Yeah.
Let me check my calendar to confirm. Yeah, I'm free those those time frames. So text the group chat Tuesday, Wednesday, whichever one works better. Then I'll send that out, and then let me know who's in that meeting, so
Okay.
that I can send out to the right people.
Yeah. I send you the list of people later.
Yeah, that sounds great. And that way we don't have to, clutter everyone's time with a lot of information. Okay, thanks everyone. I'll see you guys on Monday.
Thank you, Jenny. See you, Jenny.
Bye.
Cái race ticket.
Đúng không? Anh còn ai đến hả? Lo. Không lạnh. Vừa rồi. Bữa nay mày nấu. Không băng. Không phải cái thấy lạnh.
Let me review the homework. I just put it up on the board. Some of this you guys have already done already. I saw Active Media already uploaded their definitions done. Review the as-is feature request to deployment loop that Dan created. You're letting your team down if you're not 100% familiar with this document on Monday, because that's a waste of time. So review it with your team. Number 2, produce your team as-is workflow for that same workflow. So if you look in that workflow, you see where different departments are highlighted at different steps. Produce an asset. I don't care if it's on diagram or a Visio, or you do it on the whiteboard, you take a picture of it. Just, you should be able to explain to everybody very quickly, what is my team's contribution to the feature request and deployment loop as is currently? Number 3, what is your team working agreement? Number 4, what's your team's definition of done? When we assign a task, how do we decide it's done? Finally, a list of your task or project management resources, tools, or ceremonies like meetings. So within your team, not across team, but just within your team, how do you manage a task or a project? What resources do you use? What meetings do you have? So for example, at Tillerman, we have every Monday we have a management meeting. Then we have a team planning where we check off our products are our clients, and we check off my client team. Then during the week, everybody does a team stand-up every day, 15 minutes. End of the week, we do team retrospectives. And then management has a grooming meeting to plan the meeting. Those are our resources. So we need to know, what is that meeting? Like, what do we do in that meeting? Who is in that meeting? How do we conduct that meeting? When? The frequency? And why do we do it? What's our output? Why do we use that resource for that meeting? So we can take a look at Duke's template. It's very thorough. Just add a little bit more detail. So if we all come to the table with these, then it becomes, we start to see design thinking, the UX from where do we apply it. Make sense? Okay. And then if you're stuck on time, just declare the team before Monday. Yeah. But, any questions about today?
So we work on the definition of the team, or definition of the position that we work in.
Just as is your team right now, and maybe you don't have one. If you don't have one, then meet with your team and just be like, hey, for the next month while we're doing this, what is our definition of done? So definition of done for me is, and it goes back to, as a company, we acknowledge that the first couple of years, our definition of done is our product launch, is the feature launch, is it functioning, it's not crashing. And then it's saying, we're then like, hey, now let's open that up. definition of done for us, you can talk how can you apply it to everything. So if I use the current definition of done, the previous, launched and functional, and I apply it to something like assigning a ticket, right? If I'm the business stakeholder, did I give product enough requirements so they know what is considered launch, what is considered functional? Then that's done. But if I expand that and I say, oh, it needs to drive customer acquisition, it needs to drive customer happiness, it needs to drive this number of reach and engagement. If I now expand my definition of done to that, then it changes the way I write my ticket. It changes the way I pass my idea on to product. Right? So for you guys, when you receive an assignment from a colleague, and you get a request from UX or a request from Randy, what do you need to know to make sure you did it right? And you can have multiple definitions for this. You can say for ticket writing, for task, for feature. This is something that you should definitely, before we come to the table, talk with your team, with your collaborators, and see how do we do that. And I love what Actimedia did, because they're using the concepts now. They define it based on think, make, check, and desirability, viability, and feasibility. So how do we assign something and execute so that we take care of, we defend all of these things? So they're opening their definition of done from launched and working to is it desirable, viable, feasible, and are we fulfilling all the steps? Think, make, check. I could apply this for like if for Randy, you could say like your definition of done is when I give an idea to product completes a primary and research cycle before it goes into dev. We test as much as we can in a non-production environment before it goes. That's for me, like I can define my definition of done for a business and product measurement. Okay. The definition of done you can have for broad, or you can have it for specific tasks. Okay. Questions? Difficulty? Yeah. Sit down with your team, take half an hour, 45 minutes, have somebody report. Okay. And it's also helpful for us if you come to the meetings and we don't have any of this in place, that's still helpful for us to know. Right? When is this due? Monday. Yeah, we go to work. So this is all about, so the last 3 weeks we're learning the concepts, and there are a lot of them. When else set it up typically?
Mình có cái template nào hoặc là sample case study nào của mình viết cái practice map về tất cả
The point is, it's just their department. They're only working on it's their area.
Cái đầu tiên thì mình đã làm rồi. Thì mình xong the team members.
I would say let's keep it at the department level. You don't have to go into your individual workflow, but again, look at, this is what you guys maybe to follow up on this meeting after you leave, is go into this as is workflow, and then just look, there's a touch point between business and product, where the product develops an idea. That's so vague to me, I don't know what that means, right? And if I know downstream there's a problem with development, let's go into detail and see how that works. And it's not, you don't have to do all of them, just pick something that we can work on. Yeah, because I know you guys have so much repeating work, that's why I'm keeping it narrow. What is something that your department does to contribute to feature request deployment? Show us in detail how it works within the department. Show us how within your department. So if I'm going to design the lanes, origin, so who starts the task? This is your team. And this is your handoff. Who is receiving? This is one way you can look at it. Right, so origin, if I'm talking about the first touch point, this is business, this is Randy. Randy calls it
a midstream look, a little bit of midstream look. Let's say it goes from UX or dev.
I mean, so it just,
let's say the origin started with dev. Then who are they handing to? Or are you saying just to dev?
We're not going into, so the only touch point, I actually am exempting dev from this process, because we're looking at the upstream. We will turn our attention to dev after we clear out everything, because dev is so downstream. For us to tinker with that process before we know what's impacting it may cause more complications. So we actually want dev to stay as they are while we stabilize this, and then we actually think after we teach you guys to do this, you guys will be able to then self-adjust dev. I don't think you need us for that part. So yeah, it could be, and then within team, it could also be if the origin is like, Doug has met with Randy, right? And then within this you have product. Or in UX research, you're wearing two different hats. It doesn't have to be a person, it could be about the task also. Again, we're here for this. We have 5 hours outside of this every week that you guys can contact. Boyan is really good with this. If you guys need some coaching or whatever, or you need some feedback, you want to throw the wireframe at us for us to look at, send it over. Okay.
Như vậy thì nếu như với cái này, ngoài cái team active media là một team rồi, thì trong này mình sẽ có thêm bao nhiêu team làm trong cái assignment này nữa? Bao nhiêu team? Thì bây giờ mình sẽ chia ra bao nhiêu team để chị biết ai sẽ là người in charge này, thì tới chị gọi người đó luôn nè. Ví dụ như là team active media là chị sẽ kiếm lọc chắc chắn biết rồi.
Chị
được rồi.
gì trong này chắc 2 team
Rồi có team nào nữa?
Hai
Có team nào nữa không?
Team lead product, lead app.
Là team lead app là
lead product, lead app.
Nguyên hả?
Ví dụ như giờ
Ai
cho em là Trần Văn Hoài rất là đẹp.
Thì đó là team development nha.
Gọi là
Rồi, team ha. Team là ai lead đây?
Dạ, actually chị ơi, em nghĩ là hiện tại là hai bạn product manager đang under marketing luôn, nhưng mà trong cái workflow này á, mình sẽ tách ra UX stream, product stream và development stream về UX. Dạ, thì em nghĩ là nên mấy bạn họp chung một điều, nhưng mà mình nên tách ra thành nhiều cái khác nhau.
UX 1, product 2 và development. Development 3 và media là 4.
Dạ, đúng rồi. Còn bên là có team marketing nữa, thì bên sẽ involve vào đây.
Good student.
It's like almost
mặc
like
dù không có đại học nhưng mà là một
with
student.
product, yeah.
Đã nói độc là student.
Yeah, actually, the other resource you guys have now is Dan, because now Dan has been working with us on wireframing, and we want you guys to follow the standard format, so the other things can also consult with Dan. Or the other way you could do this, Dan, is if you want to lead the assignment, is go into your as-is workflow and then pick which workflow you need more detail on, and then break it down into who owns it, and then say, give me detail on this. Yeah, I actually think that makes a lot of sense to me to do that. Yeah. So I actually just had the thought. Because Dan has the as-is workflow. And then within the workflow there are, so he can assign.
Nếu mà về product đó thì đang làm hầu như tất cả những cái step mà product go through rồi, đúng không?
Còn chi tiết nữa, nếu như mà ví dụ như là chi tiết là anh làm vị trí là sao, tức là detail luôn, từng cái detail luôn, thì nó sẽ break down một cái workflow nhỏ trong cái workflow lớn.
Hoặc là working agreement, tụi em chỉ nghĩ là chưa phải thế nào cũng có đâu.
Working agreement thì chưa, nhưng mà đang nói về
detail đến khác.
workflow cái task luôn,
khi mọi người
workflow break
execute
down
thì mọi người sẽ execute như thế nào tiếp, vị trí tiếp thì clear hơn về
Vậy
cái
cũng là cái của
detail.
Đăng để go detail.
Đăng share cái đó của Đăng, rồi thì các team sẽ chạy vào đó mà cô.
To make it also simpler for you, for this, do the core scenario. So meaning that, okay, you may have 10 different types of feature. Do it for the most simple one, the one that happens most often for you. You don't have to do all the exceptions. Just show us how you handle your primary scenario. Okay, that should make it a bit easier for everybody. Just let us know what the scenario is. And the objective, so everybody understands, I want you to design for this. Think about who is the user of all of this? What is our purpose? The user is this room. Our purpose in having all of this is so we can see where is the gap and inefficiency, and where can we pick from what we're learning to apply. So let's add some requirements to this task. What we should have a standard for format and a standard for detail. Because if everybody produces something different, very difficult. Thankfully, we have a resource, a reference. We have DAG. DAG, I'm going to arbitrarily assign you as the standard keeper for this, right? So this way we have a parallel structure, because if it's not in parallel, we cannot compare, right? We have a time frame. We want it done by Monday. Means you guys basically have 48 hours to do it. But I consider that a challenge. Like, my team should be able to make a visual reference of my workflow in 48 hours. If not, we have a problem, right? So, and then for, I think that's, do you guys need more requirements from me? Ask if you have them, or if you're not going to be, or
Em thắc mắc về cái user testing.
user testing. You want to see how they do user testing? Yeah, that's you can request that if you want to.
How and specific for a function in the company.
Yeah. I'm curious too.
Anh Lộc hồi nãy anh có hỏi về cái framework của cái này á, thì thực sự là cái số 1, số 2 mình có cái của anh đang rồi, thì mình chỉ follow dựa vào đó mình làm detail hơn thôi. Cái số 3 với agreement vẫn có thể relate to cái phần summary trong cái dashboard của mình á, thì hồi cái output của mình có là phần definition of done thì cái này nó tùy thuộc vào từng team. Dạ. Mà nhưng mà mình có thể relate tới những cái bài học trước đây của mình á, thì mình phân chia ra được cái còn cả số 5 này là dẫn cả của anh Đức, dạ, Đức ở trên bài này.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, team.
We'll push back the leadership meeting to 1:30 so you guys have time to grab lunch and get back here.
Thank you guys.
Thank you guys.
Cho nhà lợn. Nhà đó nhà lấy đâu nhà mình máy có đầy cũ như thế, máy mới cũ rất là to, nhà lâu mới đúng không? Con mắt mới nhà lâu ấy, mắt đầu mới á. Không, test cái này đi bạn ơi. Test cái này đi bạn ơi.
Xưa với lại
cái này buộc được chưa hiểu UX của cái này nữa.
cái này không có UX đâu, cái đó chỉ phụ lại.
Thế thì nó sai rồi, nó phải nó hơi ngu rồi.
À không, cái này là mình tự chế nhá.
Thế bảo sao bạn phải xiên một cái lỗ vào đây để khít nó lại. Là một câu chuyện của UX nữa. Ở trong đấy nó có gắn một cái cuộn nào đấy để
đây là
kéo
có usability thôi.
trong này có gì này là MVP đấy.
MVP thôi.
1:30.
Cái gì?
Đó là khóa hôm kia 2 tiếng bây giờ
Đạo phải trong cái flow cho nên có phải là cái flow, với lại cái flow mà chính của UX là cái feature flow này có là cái bug flow, nhưng mà có nghĩa là bây giờ là detail hơn, chi tiết hơn, hay là
Tức là
với cái feature flow này
đối với anh nha,
feature flow và detail.
cái feature flow là hiện tại là anh đang là thì cái bước của UX là chỉ làm một cái phần nhỏ hoặc là một vài bước thôi, nhưng thực tế không, nhưng mà UX hiện tại là một
Structure team thì
nhưng mà
cái đó là một cái bài toán là rất là to.
Tại vì ở trong những cái đó là thì cái UX là phải làm research, phải làm cái này làm cái kia, phải làm lúc nào á. Thì
thế không có cái trường request sao? Không ai request thì cả thì làm cái gì?
Không ai request thì cả thì tao tự request.
Thì mày tự request thì cái gì?
tự nhiên làm research.
Đấy, thì ra đấy chỉ là một cái phút thôi, còn rất nhiều thứ. Nhưng hiện tại thì đúng là đoạn mua sản phẩm là những cái request của team đấy phần lớn là vì cái big, cái kia nó quá lớn, nó sẽ có một loạt thứ nó
không ai request đâu. Đúng rồi, không ai request thì ta sẽ nghĩ ra cái gì đó, ta có bỏ vô ticket backlog, ta có đi verify lại. Tức là ta sẽ là người chủ động. Mà chắc là bao lâu rồi không sẽ
từ backlog đấy.
Bây giờ lấy cái backlog ra, product backlog á, thì cái lôi cái nào trong đó ưu tiên là research thôi.
Nếu như anh không tìm được cái chung thì anh có thể lấy anh biết một cái nào đó cụ thể xong rồi anh nghĩ ra ví dụ cái nào mà trong US mà anh làm nhiều bước nhất á, kiểu là anh làm research, anh làm cái này là mình có thêm cái
nhiều loại để nhau nhau dễ hơn. Một là rất khó để đánh giá, mà sẽ có cái gì từ đây một cái
hoặc là mình có thể làm cái version nhiều nhất và ít nhất.
Đúng rồi.
Nếu mình do tạo được là có khi US sẽ làm có như này, nhưng mà có khi US sẽ bị dùng cũng như này.
Bây giờ tách ra cứ xong US là được, không đéo qua tới product là một cái flow khác của product. Vậy không được.
Nhưng mà
tại vì lúc trước là cái flow chung US product.
Tại vì mình bị đắc ở chỗ là US làm được product là
IT.
Nên là kiểu, nhưng mà từ vẽ ra hết đen, ví dụ khi mà anh vẽ ra nó chỉ là cái product nó cũng mấy bạn product á, bạn cũng involve trong cái workflow của anh luôn, trong khi cái IT á, cái product cũng involve trong cái workflow của IT luôn.
Đúng rồi, có thì anh nói xem đi là hiện tại nó đang bị trùng lặp.
Nhưng mà mình cần phải visualize để mình có thể nhìn ra được là nó đang bị overlap ở chỗ nào.
Đúng rồi, overlap và clear chỗ report to rồi loại nào. Kể cả ví dụ thật sự thì đúng là PM vậy, một nửa các bạn sẽ phải involve vào research và làm product chứ không phải là làm business. Các bạn nếu như bạn muốn involve vào business, các bạn có một cái